Good evening. Welcome back to The Bible Speaks today from LBC Television Ministries. Here in tonight, rainy and stormy, and oh my goodness, we're going to get 10 inches of snow, Latonia. Isn't the weather wonderful? Now, by the time you see this will all be past history. But today is the 3rd of March when we're recording this program. And as I recall coming into the studio, it's raining and at about 48, 49 degrees. That's supposed to happen all night. And then overnight it's supposed to, or tomorrow morning it's going to turn to snow. And the temperature is going to go down to something like -1 by the evening. And we're supposed to get 10 inches in northern Kentucky. And you've got to wonder what's going on, because wish it would make its mind up, don't you? But by the time, as I say, you see this program, it's all in the history, and the birds will be singing and the grass will be growing, and we'll be complaining about something else. But that's the way it is tonight, folks, as they say. And which is, in a way, kind of a little illustration of what seems to be a major crisis today is yesterday's old news. You know, we survived. Wonderful. All right, we're still on this Writers of the Bible Who Wrote the Bible series. You don't groan, it'll be over soon, don't worry. But I want to make a couple of points. I talk very blithely about J and E and D and P and all this, and I'm sure some of you go, what are you talking about? And even those of you who've been following since day one, and some of my followers, that's not the right word, some of the people who communicate with me over the internet have asked questions over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it's fairly obvious that people forget that the Bible that we know today is composed of more than one source. In other words, it's not all one person writing it. Moses did not write the Bible. I know that's probably going to get me sackcloth and ashes and all that sort of thing, but seriously, folks, the Bible as we know it today consists of the Bible, the Torah, the first 5 books, right? And then we have the writings and then the prophets. And we're talking predominantly about the first 5 books, which is, unless you've mistaken everything in the last few weeks, the core of the Bible, the basis of it. Everything you need to know, basically, is in those first 5 books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yes, there's a lot of other stuff after that, but those 5 have got everything. You have the laws, have the history, have everything in it, all right? Well, Chronicles has a bit of history too, but that's beside the point at the moment. And what we have and what we've been looking at in the last few weeks is how different people's slant or interpretation or way of telling the story of the early history and the early faith of the Jewish people, the Israelites, in the different sources they come from. Remember that the J source was written in Judah. The E source was the Northern Kingdom's version that slightly changed to accommodate their problems that they were having and the different areas of worship. Deuteronomy, written by Jeremiah, as we think, as we talked about in the last few weeks, which kind of try to put things right and indicate who was in charge and who was responsible. And now we have this P document, which is known as the priest's document, because it is, trust me, all about the priests. And we finished up last week by saying it, and you listening, of course, but that the J and E, the combined J and E version, just to recap, that happened when the northern kingdom was conquered by the Syrians, and the refugees and people escaped from what was Israel into Judah, and they brought with them their copy of, let's call it the Bible. It wasn't at the time, it was just the Torah for them, but their copy of the history, of the rules and regulations. They brought it with them into Judah, where it was combined together to form a logical flowing document. In other words, they combined the 2 stories together, so that's why you see in so many parts of the Old Testament, certainly in the first 5 books, you see these double stories. You tell the story once and then a few verses later you tell it again with a different sort of angle on it or with different details in it. Okay, so the J and E was combined. Okay, now Deuteronomy, and we're going to find that, we'll see that as we go, was written by Jeremiah, put together by Jeremiah in the reign of King Josiah, and just slightly afterwards when the Israelites or the Judah went into captivity into Babylon. But the P document that we've been talking about was written earlier than Deuteronomy. For a number of years, scholars assumed it was a later document, and then we discovered it wasn't, because Deuteronomy refers to it. You can't refer to a document that hasn't been written yet if you don't know what's in there. So obviously, and we'll talk about that in tonight's program and maybe next week, how we do that. But let's go back to a couple of things I said at the end of last week, that the J and E version, J and E, that's the Judah and the Israel combined document, is a justification of Moses. It's a justification of the Moses angle, the Levites, descendants of Moses, the Levite priests, the whole their particular way of thought. The P document, so which comes after that, in other words, we have J-E, then P, then D, is a justification of Aaron. And it was written when the priesthood was all Aaronid priests. You have to understand, people don't like to think about this when it relates to religion or to especially to the Bible. The Bible, I believe, is the inspired word of God. No problem there. But it's put together by men. And different men have different slants on how they perceive things. We've seen that in the history of the E version coming from northern Israel, which was the northern kingdom, which didn't have the temple, which had different places of worship and different attitudes. Didn't have the cherubs, it had the calves. The Judah version, which had the temple and all the rest of the stuff that came from the old times, and people put down their versions, and lo and behold, the two were combined. So now we get to a situation where somebody who is an Aaronite priest, in other words, a priest descended from Aaron, the Aaron group. So let's say we have the Levite group and the Aaron group. Right now, the Aaron group is in charge. And they write their version of the same things, same events, same history stories, everything, but from their point of view. And the P document makes the point repeatedly about being the justification of Aaron. That Aaron is as important as Moses, if not more important in some relations. Okay? So we have the two brothers. One in the JE version, it says that Aaron is the Levite brother of Moses, which could mean he was just in the same tribe. And then we have the other P version where he is a physical blood relation brother of Moses. And P goes on to it's typical priest work. It's hard to explain in a few words, but the priests make the point that they are indispensable. That's really what it comes down to. Okay? The people's channel to God is sacrifice through the priest to the altar. I think one of the differences between the Protestant faith and the Catholic faith is that the Catholic faith tends to be through the priest to God, to the altar. Protestants tend to believe on a one-on-one directly to God. The priest, the pastor, just there to guide you. I know that's in a nutshell, and it's not strictly the actual bottom line, but basically that's it. The people's way to get to God, to have God listen to their prayers, is to sacrifice through a priest on an altar. In the temple, not any temple, not where you like to be, not over there, here in the temple. The bottom line is, according to the P version, is if you sin, if you commit sins, then the only way to get your sins forgiven is to sacrifice, is to give something up. We all talk about God's mercy. You know, the argument is, what if somebody never heard of God but instinctively knew there was something out there, you know, living in a isolated desert island, never got the word preached at them? What could they expect? Well, they could expect God's mercy. We talk about this all the time. We kind of glibly blow it out there, you know, oh, God's mercy. But in fact, to be perfectly honest, most of us are hoping we do have God's mercy, because we certainly haven't earned anything else. So in P, in the whole dialogue, the whole passages that we can attribute to P in the Bible, there's not a single mention of God's mercy. It never talks about mercy. Okay? Grace, faithfulness, those sort of things, repentance, they never appear. Now, you say, oh, they're in the Bible. Of course they are. They're in the J and E version when they're all put together. But we're talking now about... Try to imagine this. We take the Bible and then magically we take out the J version, and there's the book of J. And there's the book of E, and now here's the book of P, and then eventually we'll get Deuteronomy, okay? They're all telling the same story from different points of view with different emphasis depending on who's telling the story. In the P version, the priest's version, as I said, God's faithfulness, repentance, those sort of things don't appear. It develops the point, as far as the priests are concerned, that being sorry is not enough. It's okay to be sorry, but you've got to do something about it. Okay? You've got to go and sacrifice. In P, God is just. That's the emphasis there. God is just. You broke the rules, you do the time. Okay? There's a set of rules that must be followed for forgiveness. Something that we don't acknowledge today. We don't acknowledge that we have to follow a set of rules. We have to ask for forgiveness, and we're given it. But back then, from the P point of view, if you sinned or if you felt you'd done something to offend God, you better get your butt into the temple with a sacrifice, or you weren't going to be forgiven. It's a big contrast to the J and E versions, which is full of God's mercy and love and faithfulness and everything else. Now, remember, these are all going to be combined down the road, so we'll get all the different aspects of God, aren't we? But P is developing a concept of God, as opposed to some idea, a real concept of God. And the work is artistic, it very is, but it's mostly theological and it's very political. Now, don't go up in arms and say, oh, the Bible isn't political. It was at the time it was written, these different versions. There was a lot going on. The Levite priests see it one way, the Aaron priests see it another way. And depending on which is in favor at the time, and at the time P was written, it was the Aaronid priests, then you will get different emphasis on different things. It happens. I mean, you can look at it. It's very clear. I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but I have a book, as I've said before, which has several sections of the Bible split up into their different source elements. And each one reads like a story on its own. And yet they've been very carefully put together to make the whole thing read as a story, which shows, in my view, God's hand over the whole thing. But that's the subject of another thing, okay? But the P version defends the Aaronid priests' legitimacy. In other words, yeah, we're the only ones who should be priests. And we'll see that later on in the next couple of weeks, how important that is. Not the Levites, us, Aaron's priests. They're the ones who have the authority, and we're legitimate, okay? And there's the other thing. It also ensured, to be honest, their livelihood. How do the priests... Now, they're all from the tribe of Levi. And people get confused when you say Levites and Aaronids. Let's say that they're all Levites. There's the Mushites, which are following direct line from Moses, and the Aaronids, which are direct line from Aaron. And depending on which one, as I say, was in authority, was which angle you got. But in either case, if you remember, the tribe of Levi did not have any land as such. They served in the temple, or the tabernacle. They were the religious people, and the sacrifice that you took to the temple, part of that went to feed the priests. I mean, that's right up through into New Testament times. It's still there. So by establishing your legitimacy and authority, you made sure you got fed. I mean, that's as simple as that. There were times when, where Israel, the Jews, broke away from following Yahweh or Jehovah, whichever one they looked at, they call it, and started worshipping all these other gods and stopped bringing sacrifices to the temple when the priests were on, whichever they were, Moshites or Aaronites, were on kind of hard times, So here's the point then. The Aaronid priests are now, at the time that JP was written, are now in the driving seat, and they're making sure they get taken care of. The other thing P does is it tries to deal with what it perceived as slights against Aaron. In other words, try and put Aaron in a better light. If you think of reading the JE stories, they kind of put Aaron as the bad boy. I mean, he did the golden calf. Oh, Aaron criticized Moses. Aaron and Miriam told Moses he didn't know what he was doing, and Miriam got white hair and was struck dumb or got leprosy, I forget which. But, Aaron doesn't come off in a very good light. In the P version, they try and show him in a better light. But they have the problem of how to deal with Moses. Moses is entrenched in the national psyche. You can't say, actually, Moses wasn't all that great. It's just not done, He's a national hero. But what P does is every time you see Moses mentioned, it's Aaron's added to it. Instead of being Moses, it's Moses and Aaron. The Lord said unto Moses and Aaron. Okay? I mean, remember the water from the rock at Meribah, the story there. Okay? Where Moses strikes the rock and the water comes out because they haven't got any water. And apparently the Bible tells us that because Moses said, we will bring out the water from the rock, God said his punishment would be he wouldn't go into the promised land. Okay? In Exodus, if you read Exodus 17, it's all Moses. Moses did it, Moses said it, Moses banged the rock, Moses, everything else, right? If you read P, and it's the same version, it leaves a lot else. It leaves a lot of it out. Aaron's kind of left out of it. Genesis in P is shortened, goes quite small. Joseph, the story of Joseph, goes from 10 chapters in JE. There are 10 chapters on the story of Joseph and how, the pharaohs and all that, goes to a couple of sentences in P. They're not interested, the priests, in Levite priest stories. P doesn't go with angels and dreams and talking animals and things like that. P is strictly by the book, and it doesn't mention any of those. And there are some additions in P that emphasize that view. That, if it's got angels and dream sequences and talking animals like the snake or things like that, Joseph's stairway to heaven, that sort of thing, it's all out. It's not there. The story's the same, it just don't mention all the other things. P, the P source of the Bible is half of Exodus. Half of it. It's half of Numbers and nearly all of Leviticus, which you'd expect because Leviticus is all those rules, isn't it? For example, when the spies go to the promised land, right, that they only mention in J&E, it's Caleb is the one spy who comes back. All the others say, oh, it's too difficult there. There's too many of them. The walls of the city are high and all that. Caleb comes back and says, yeah, we can handle them. Okay? In P, it's Caleb and Joshua, would you believe? So in some parts of when you're reading through the Bible, in that part of the Bible, you'll read Caleb, and sometimes you'll read Caleb and Joshua. So we just assume the fact that there were two of them and nobody matters, right? Caleb and Joshua get to live until the Israelites go to the promised land. Remember, the rule is that you're going to wander in the desert for 40 years until all this generation that sinned against me is gone. Okay? In J and E, Joshua didn't help building the golden calf. Why? Because he was up on the mountain, being there in case Moses needed him. But P can't say this because that denigrates Aaron. Okay, so it leaves it out. Joshua stood, remember the stories of when Moses was in the tabernacle praying, Joshua stood guard, stopped people coming in. Well, that's a priest's job. And in fact, he should, under the P rules, he should have been executed because he broke the law and shouldn't, broke one of the laws, but only priests could guard the tabernacle. So how are you going to explain Joshua's merit? Okay, to last until the end of the 40 years. Well, you leave all that out. He was one of the spies. Because he was a good spy and came back with a good tone, he gets to stay on for the 40 years. And P, there's all sorts of things in P. The one I kind of took my fancy a bit was in Genesis. P goes on about the cave in Macphelton. It's a long description, a really long description, and it's between Abraham and the Hittites about buying this cave to bury his dad. Why is this in, and some of the other important stories that P could have put in, not there? Well, the cave was in Hebron. Hebron was an Aaronid priestly city. So you can see the relationship. P puts in things that support its point of view. J and E puts in its point of view. And the relationship with God is from their different points of view. So between the biblical text and the real world of the authors, we start to get the evidence to locate the author or where P came from. In P, God is just, as I said. It's a set of rules that must be followed for forgiveness. Okay? It's just so different. It really just gets to the point where P is so, strict, regimented. So, P was written and conceived, as far as I'm concerned, as an alternative to J and E. There wasn't any intention initially of merging anything together. It was alternative. Okay, you talk about that. You're Levite priests, you've got J and E, and you say that. Well, we are the priests of Aaron, and we say this. Okay? And what it means is that when J and E, the combined version, was well known when P was written. So that, again, kind of defines the time frame. It just, you can tell that whoever wrote P had a good working knowledge of J and E. Okay? Jeremiah, who we've said put together Deuteronomy, accepted J and E, but he didn't quote anything from P per se. Did he know it was written? Did he know P? Was it written? Oh, I believe that he knew it well. P had to be written before Deuteronomy. We see quotations of P in Deuteronomy, not added in, but we see pieces of P in Deuteronomy. We even see some story reversals where there's a story that this happened to so-and-so, and in Deuteronomy it's reversed, and the bad guy becomes the good guy, and that sort of thing. Jeremiah didn't like P. Why? Well, because it didn't tie in with his ideas of how the priest should work. Jeremiah was a Levite priest. P was all about Aaron, descendants of Aaron. So there was, if you will, political and religious infighting between the two versions, and from time to time it changed. We'll see in a little while, I'll mention it briefly now, but P was written during the time of King Hezekiah, who brought the whole country back on its straight feet. His great-grandson, Josiah, supported the Levite priests. So Jeremiah comes to the forefront. So all these sources eventually came into the Bible as we know it today. But it's sometimes hard to fathom this out. But it's amazing that we have the different sources opposed to each other quite strongly in some respects or other. If you like, it's like Democrats and Republicans writing an article about the same subject. The Republican view is this, the Democrat view is that, and then somebody puts it together so it all sounds like one. Imagine how difficult that would be, because they're diametrically opposed. But that's the way it is. And we'll pick this up next week when we get more into the details of this source we call P. Until then, just remember those first 5 books are the core, the Torah, that we're eventually going to be talking about as a whole. Till then, good night and God bless you.